All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to my presentation. Appreciate you guys filling in here for today. My name is Justin Grote, and today I'm going to be talking about optimizing Visual Studio Code for PowerShell. So what that basically means is today we're going to go through looking at Visual Studio Code and how it operates, and some things about if you're just, whether you've been using VS Code for a while or you're just getting started with VS Code. My aim with this presentation is to first show you sort of today, if I were to do a brand new session, how I would get into VS Code and set it up for the first time. We're going to spend the next half talking a bit about what's been new this year in terms of all the new stuff that has come out. And then finally, we will end with questions. And if there's no questions, I could talk about this for 5 hours. So we got plenty we could do. Really want to thank our sponsors, as always. They make sure that this happen. Between Chalkley, Jane Street, Ironman, all great companies, Knowledge Factory, Synergy. They all do wonderful work within the community. Adam Driscoll flew all the way here to show. He's such a tremendous version of the community. That's just one example of all these great supporters, and we're always happy to have them. Also, big thank you to my company, Ally Digital, for sponsoring my travel and my time here. Ally Digital is a multinational MSP. Our sort of elevator pitch is that you really don't pay for your own or manage your own plumbing. You don't do your own electricity. More and more, you don't really need to do your own IT. If you have a lot of the underlying infrastructure and you really want to focus on what your core competency is, what your business is good at, and what your developers are good at, maybe you want to have us take over the rest of it and handle the rest in a manageable, scalable way. We handle stuff all across the board, as you can see from that portfolio. So if you have an interest in any of these things and want really smart people like me working on that, come check us out. So about me, my name is Justin Grote. I'm a data center solutions architect with Ally Digital. I'm also a hopefully 5 times MVP by the time July rolls around, but right now actually I am a 5-time now, hopefully 6. I got to update. I work on a bunch of stuff. I have a lot of interests and I get bored easy, so I have all kinds of different modules out there. I contribute to the PowerShell VSCode Extension. I'm not a Microsoft employee, but community contributions are accepted, and the wonderful Andy Jordan helps field those. And I also have, I think this year, had some of my first pull requests merged to the actual PowerShell repository, which I'm very proud of. So I'm a PowerShell contributor now as well. So thanks to the magic of open source. These slides, there we go. So these slides, this QR code I'll have on a couple different places. Don't worry about it. I'll have it again at the end. This is just links to the GitHub where this slide deck is. This slide deck has some links in it that may be useful to you. And we'll also include it when the recording goes out. I'll try to make sure they're in the little show notes at the bottom. So previously, some of you may have deja vu because I do this presentation a lot. This presentation I've done more or less 5 different times, as well as a version with Andy Jordan, who's one of the PowerShell team members and lead on the PowerShell extension. And the reason for that being is that PowerShell and Visual Studio Code are integral. Visual Studio Code is the default editor for PowerShell now. It is the recommended editor. And Visual Studio Code went from when I started working with it about 10 years ago now into this wonderful fledgling sort of cool kind of fast text editor with an unfortunate baggage name of Visual Studio. Ended up becoming this, the premier text editor across all disciplines, all languages, Microsoft or not. And so my big belief with Visual Studio Code is that it fulfills the PowerShell sacred vow in the same way, is that if you take the time to invest your time in Visual Studio Code, it will be one of the best investments you make in your career, and it will continue to pay dividends. And so just as we know with PowerShell, for all of us who have learned PowerShell, and how much it has improved our careers and how much we've been able to apply it to everything, not just traditional Windows system administration, but to Linux and all these different disciplines, Visual Studio Code can do that for you too. It's a great PowerShell editor. It's great for all that, but it's great for all kinds of things. It's a first-class C# editor now. It's, the most popular Python editor. It can do a whole gamut of things. So if you take the time to learn it, you'll find that you can switch into all these other disciplines without really having to do a lot of retooling. The way debugging works in C# and in Python looks really similar to once you learn how to do it in PowerShell. A lot of that knowledge translates. So that's my elevator pitch for why I think you should learn Visual Studio Code. I'm pretty sure I don't need to do that based on the hands that were thrown up during the keynote. Lots of people are using Visual Studio Code. I'm so glad to see that. Continue to do it. So that being said, though, there's a lot of information in these presentations. That's like 5-6 hours. And so while I went through stuff there for all these, that information may now be out of date. There may be some things that I recommended that I no longer recommend, settings that were turned this on that are now just on by default. So my plan with today, because today is a longer presentation than usual, is for the first half to kind of go through and show you a setup from scratch today. If I were to set up a brand new Visual Studio Code, or I'm like setting it up for a coworker, what I recommend you set up. So I hope that you will be able to have a position where you can sort of maybe learn a few tricks here or there, have some things installed, so that you at least can very quickly get up to be ready to work with PowerShell in Visual Studio Code. And then, as I mentioned, the second half, we'll talk about what's new this year. There's a bunch of stuff. Obviously, AI is front of mind. One rule I always have for this presentation is there's nothing that I show that isn't free, that you can't just get for free. And now that I've not talked about Copilot in past presentations because there wasn't a free option. Now that there's a free option for GitHub Copilot, I can talk about it. And the short is like, I use it a lot, and I hope to show you some of the techniques that I use for PowerShell that really help me be more effective and be more productive. My favorite tagline for AI these days that I just feel is true and was the same as the tagline was for PowerShell is that PowerShell isn't going to replace your job, but somebody who knows how to use PowerShell is going to replace you. And AI, I feel, is sort of in that same way. These agentic models allow you to be more productive if you know how to use them. So is it going to take your job? Probably not. But somebody who knows how to use it and can be more productive than you and verify their code better and be able to do those things is going to be more productive, be more effective. And when promotion time comes, who are they going to choose? So keep that in mind when we talk about and we dismiss about AI. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of things, but there is some value there, and I hope to show some of that today. All right, and that's it for slides. We're real simple here. So what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and dive into, I just have sort of a fresh desktop here. And one of the things about Visual Studio Code here, I have a desktop here, and you can download, of course I still have it open. Close that here. So with Visual Studio Code, what we have here is we have, if you download Visual Studio Code, normally it installs to your system and that kind of thing. I'm showing something that's a little bit different here. If you go to the Visual Studio Code download site, there's a point where you can download it as a zip file. So you can download Visual Studio Code and it's all just in a zip file, and you unzip it and it's there. And one of the neat little things you can do with Visual Studio Code is this folder isn't typically there, but if you just go in and create this data folder, what that will do is that will tell Visual Studio Code, use this data folder as an isolated, place for my settings. So rather than setting it in your app data folder, you now have this isolated Visual Studio Code that is all within that folder. So all the settings, all the extensions, all your customizations go in here. So if you're doing a Visual Studio Code demo like I'm doing today, this is really helpful. And I need to delete this out real quick because I've been messing with it. So if I go ahead and just make a new folder here again and choose data, and I fire up Visual Studio Code, I will have a brand new fresh Visual Studio Code. So even though I have Visual Studio Code installed on my computer and it's got all kinds of customizations and tunes and tweaks, this is a way I can get my own little sort of sandbox VS Code. So if you haven't seen this before, it's super nice. So if you want to demo something, you want to test something of how Visual Studio Code works out of the box without affecting your main, your main VS Code, this is a nice way to do it. So that's what we're going to use for this demo today. So when you first open Visual Studio Code, you have your desktop, you get this nice startup, you got all this info about themes and such. And since we are going to be doing a presentation here, and we like to do light themes for these, we're going to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and browse additional. This is a nice new thing that's been added this year, is that you can live preview all the themes in the gallery without even downloading them. So every theme that is available in the gallery, and there's one in particular that I like for demos, which is Night Owl Light. Without even installing the theme, you can preview it and see, okay, great. Whoops, that went a little fast. Let's do that again. Color theme, additional themes, light owl. Now it's going to be, Night Owl Light. There we go. And so we'll go ahead, download, trust the publisher to install. We got our extension, and so now we have a nice light theme for what we're doing. So that's a nice little way if you want to preview some themes right off the bat. If you want to tune, tweak, you have certain color preferences you can go through and just sort of preview whatever theme you want. Seems like a little thing, seems like a minor thing, but this is where you're going to be living for your development. And so you want it to be as comfortable as possible for you. And there's tons of accessibility settings, tons of options for fonts and configuration and all kinds of tune and tweakability. So there's no shame in taking a little time to make it yours, but always have like an option like we have here. So like when I'm doing a demo, so everybody can see it sort of the way that they have it. So the next thing we'll generally want to do is that I'm a big believer in the settings sync feature of VS Code. So you have this option for backup and sync settings. And then you can go ahead and just hit sign in here, and you can choose what you want to sync. But this is just like anything. You back up your data, you back up your files. By having your settings synced, not only do you have a persistent backup that will keep things, all your settings whenever you change them, you now also have this whole portable set of settings that when you go to somewhere else, you log into a different computer, you go into code spaces, you go into anywhere that VS Code runs, you are remoting SSH to a server using that whole server remoting thing, which we'll talk a little bit about. You have this way to consistently have your settings wherever you go. So I'm just going to go ahead and sign in, and you can choose either Microsoft or GitHub for this. It really doesn't matter which one you use. It's just there's two different places that they save these. I personally save this in the Microsoft side of things because if you save them in the GitHub side of things, those settings carry into code spaces and such like that. And while that's useful for most people, I develop code spaces, and so I want to see a code space when it's fresh. And so while now you can do some fancy stuff with profiles, but originally when I was doing all this a couple years ago, you couldn't do that. So that's the only reason I save in the Microsoft side of things versus the GitHub side of things. But there's really no difference. It's all the same backend. It all uses the same stuff on the back. It's just your preference of where you want to save those settings. And sometimes as an aside thing too, if you're using the insiders version, which is sort of the early adopter bleeding edge version of VS Code, that has sort of a separate place. So like if you want to test new settings, you can save all those sync settings in that little side area. But you can also use the same one there. So I'm just going to go ahead and sign in with my little personal guy here. I'll get my nice little MFA. I didn't bring my passkey with me, so I got to do this the old-fashioned way. And by the way, I use a Microsoft login there, but if you only have a GitHub account, that works too. I have conflicts because I have a couple things here. Now this is going to come and pull down all my settings and turn things on and turn on extensions. And this might go fast. Last I tested the Wi-Fi here, it was doing pretty good, but we're going to let this one sit to the Wi-Fi gods and see how it does. So while it's doing that, we all know about our little terminal down here. One thing I forgot to do here is type screencast. So if you're not familiar with this setting, this is a toggle screencast mode. Let me zoom in on that. So this toggle screencast mode is a nice little thing if you're doing any kind of demos or anything like that. You can turn that on. Yeah, screencast mode. And now whenever you type, it'll show what you're typing or doing on screen, as well as if it ties to a keyboard shortcut, it'll say what that keyboard shortcut does. So that's great for demos because you're like, oh, let me just do this thing and go here and do that. And then the first hand you get up is, how did you do that? So now you'll be able to see it. You can go back to the recording. But one thing I forgot to say up front is that this particular part of the presentation, this is an open questions thing. So if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I've sort of timed it to end a little early. So feel free to interrupt. There's something like, hey, what's that? How did you do that? And I'll either answer it or I'll say I'm coming to that. So now we're going through it's doing all the installations. And so now I'm starting to get all my little extensions coming in and all my sync and all that kind of stuff. And I just kind of wanted to show that settings. Here's my settings coming in. It's setting this, it's putting there, it's doing this. But I'm going to go ahead and blow all that away now that I've just done it to, again, show how this is all containerized in here. So I have my data, my user data with all that information that I just synced. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. It's already got a ton of stuff in there. This might take a second. Actually, you know what? We're going to do this the faster way for the demo. We're just going to rename it data.old. And I will make a new folder. And when I reopen code, there it is fresh again. So that's a nice, I was just showing you how you have that nice little isolated way to play with things without worrying about like messing up your main profile. So it's a great way to like sandbox and play around and do things for that kind of stuff. So we're going to get our light theme back here again. I always want to do it the other way, but I have to stay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're back here, and the reason I undid that was I wanted to show you the settings sync and how it brings everything in and has a nice little view for your history where you can go back and do all that, check all that stuff out. It's super nice, but we're still just going on sort of like a basic setup. So the next thing you'll want to do is you'll want to be able to do stuff with PowerShell, because by default, you'll get your terminal there. And if you do something where you choose a language and you try to use PowerShell, it's there. But I don't have any Intellisense. I don't have anything. It asks you, do you want to install PowerShell? So it does a lot of stuff to kind of guide you to get there. But if you want to have a sort of batteries included experience to get started, I have made an extension called the PowerShell Extension Pack. Who here has used the PowerShell Extension Pack before? Great, that's excellent. So this is nothing really fancy. It's literally just basically a JSON file that just says, here's the extensions I recommend. They're pretty easy to make, so if you ever want to make your own extension pack and publish it, you can. And so you'll see there's about 33 extensions in here. And the main thing around this is the idea is these are extensions that I recommend that help you in development, both with PowerShell and Visual Studio Code, but sort of the ecosystem of what you would typically be doing in this. So I include things to help you with GitHub in this. I include things to help you with code spaces in this. I don't include containers, but that would be like the next one I would recommend, because more and more they're really useful. But there's lots of stuff in here about Markdown. I made a couple changes. I pushed a new change last night to make a couple changes. Some of you probably got it and like, why did my logs suddenly change? I made a new extension a while ago, about a half a year ago, called Crisp Logs Highlighter that makes the log highlighting much cleaner than the default Visual Studio one. So I include that one because it's been stable and it looks good. This extension, Filter Line, I find fills in a really nice gap in Visual Studio, where if you have a giant file and if you want to find things, you still have to do the find and go to the thing. What Filter Line will do is it's just like the find, but when you do a find, it only shows you the lines that have that. It's kind of like a grep. In fact, it uses rip grep in the background. So it's a nice little extension that kind of grabs those short aspect. So with this extension pack, you can, let me just close this. With this extension pack, you can either just choose to install everything, and you also have the option of just going through it and installing the individual little components that you want. So I'm just going to go ahead and install everything. Trust, of course. Do you trust all these 500 people that have published things? And like, yeah, of course, you'll know that. Why not? For some trust, all packages that get published to the Visual Studio marketplace have to go through a process. They get antivirus checked. It's not flawless. Every once in a while, something shady gets through. But for the most part, if you look at the publishers, you know them, you trust them. That's your decision to make, your call to make. But ultimately, I trust the people that are in this pack because one of them is me. So I hope I do. So some of these things get installed. There will be a Pester Test extension thing that'll warn you. This is an extension that I made for Pester Tests. I'm just going to say yes on that. Go ahead and activate that. And so now we have sort of a little bit more stuff here. We got some more stuff here down the side with some stuff about GitHub. So now the next thing we'll probably want to do is go ahead and sign into GitHub to use all these things. I've already signed in using the settings sync. So now I'll be able to just sort of OAuth into the rest of these guys just automatically. It's just got to say, do you want to use this app? Do you want to use this app? Yep. And so now I'm kind of signed in for all these aspects and the extensions that I have. So now we have that. Now we have that set up and we have sort of this view of our environment. So one of the nice things that's been added this year is the ability to, profiles have sort of existed for a little while, but now we have this really nice new profile editor. And so in our profile editor, we can now define, you used to have to do this kind of stuff at the command line and do fancy settings things, but you now have this way to define different profiles for different environments. So you may have a set profile that's just for PowerShell development where you don't want all this extra stuff and you want it focused just for PowerShell. And maybe you change certain settings, or maybe you have a certain version of PowerShell installed that you want to use for that particular profile. Like you want to have a profile that's only for Windows PowerShell development, and you want to set that default PowerShell to be for Windows PowerShell. I don't recommend that, but you can do it. And so if I go ahead and do a new profile here, I can just say this is just a test demo one. You can choose whatever icon you want, and that icon will show down here in the lower left, so you can kind of have a quick reference for what profile you're on at any given time. And one of the nice things is that if you already have a profile that you want to start from, you have this option to go ahead and copy from a profile. And there's also some profile templates here. So some examples of if you want to do Python or Angular, some that are basically ready to go. This is very, very new, and I hope to contribute a profile template for PowerShell for this so that you would be able to, if you're just getting started, rather than have to watch my video and do this and click this, to be able to just select the PowerShell profile template and have it do all that stuff and get everything set up the way that I generally recommend as an option. So hopefully that'll come in the future, and I'll be talking about it next year, but that's not a thing right now. So we're just going to go ahead and copy from our default profile, because that's typically what you want to do. And then you also have this option where you can say, go ahead and copy from the default profile, or you can say, I don't want to copy the keyboard shortcuts. I just want what I'm doing here. I don't want the tasks. I don't want snippets. Or maybe I want to have the extensions copied and manage them, or you can say, use the extensions from the default profile, and whatever I install locally, override it with whatever that other profile is. So this is really nice because it gives you this ability to set up all these different kinds of little environments that weren't previously available. You have this ability to kind of pick and choose where you want to go, and be able to set up all these little tuning and tweakings that we used to have to do, like the data folder thing that I'm showing. That used to be the only way to do it. Now we have this great little profiles thing. So this is a great thing to check out, and you can preview it to see like what it's going to look like. It'll open it in a whole new window, and so if you go through and change the settings, you can see what that profile is going to look like. And these are shareable, so you can, once you create them, you can go here and export them, and you can export it to a file. You can export it to a GitHub gist, which will just put it out on your GitHub for anybody to use, and then they can read it back in. So these profiles are shareable. So if you come up with like a work environment that you like, that's good for a particular thing you're developing, you can export that and then give it to your new coworker who came online and just say, oh, here's a profile that has it all set up for our PowerShell environment. Just import that, and now it's all set up, for them, and then they can go and tune and tweak it from there. But that at least gets them started. So that's profiles. Profiles are just, again, a really great way to manage some different settings, because this stuff has gotten really complex. If you go into the settings file, there's thousands of settings, not even counting having extensions installed, and then the extensions bring a whole bunch with them. And so this lets you sort of tune and tweak your environment the specific way that you want. So now we have that installed. We have our PowerShell environment set up, and now we're getting our PowerShell terminal down here. Occasionally, you've probably seen this where you have an extension called PowerShell Extension. This used to be called Integrated Terminal, and we decided to rename that so it's a little more clear what it is. One thing that you may see a lot in PowerShell is that when you're doing any kind of authoring, the most common thing that you've probably seen is now when I do this stuff, now I'm getting all my completion. Okay, great, that's all working. But if I type sleep 100, or you run any kind of script down here, suddenly that stuff stops working. Why is that? Well, the answer to that is that in order to make this work like the ISE, the PowerShell extension is probably one of the most complicated extensions on the back end of any extension that exists in the marketplace. And the reason for that being is that in order to make all this stuff work like ISE, so that you get like the nice completions and everything goes through, it all has to run through one run space in one PowerShell instance, because that's where all your variables and such are stored. That's just how PowerShell was originally designed to run. And so because of that, it all has to sort of run through this one pipeline. It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny because it's a lot like how JavaScript in general used to run, is that there was just the one JavaScript loop, and everything else is just this giant Byzantine scaffolding on pushing stuff through this one little loop. Some of that stuff's gotten better in the JavaScript world, but unfortunately PowerShell still is that way. So the way the PowerShell extension works is that you have that sort of core little run space that stuff runs through, and then there's this whole scaffolding that you don't see in the PowerShell extension that is a whole task manager and everything, that everything you do, from clicking a link to going to a folder to, doing control space to get completion, anything that ends up having to go through that little run space gets queued, gets tracked, gets run through, and then comes back out. And most of the time it's fast, you don't see it. But if you do something like Sleep 1000, you have just dropped a bomb into that, because we're always going to prioritize what you want to do over what we want to do in the extension to show you something. But when you're running a script, that script is now currently tying up that loop. And so everything else that I'm trying to do here is all queuing up, waiting for your script to finish. And then once I cancel it, all of a sudden, now all the other stuff works. The analysis, all that kind of stuff works. So if you've ever wondered why sometimes your Intellisense stops working, that's probably the number one reason, is just go ahead and check that you don't have something running in your PowerShell extension window. And if you cancel it, then everything will start working again. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that. We find more and more things that we've been able to take things that we can do what's called static analysis on them, where we don't actually have to get into that space in order to do it. So there's a lot of stuff, if you've been using the PowerShell extension for a long time, about 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of that stuff got improved so that a lot of that stuff just happens out here and it doesn't have to go through that little pipeline. And so a lot of stuff is faster and some stuff still works even if that little pipeline is not available because you're running a script in it. But that's like the biggest thing that I can offer for you that's not intuitive is that if a script is running, it should show tied up there. And it used to, I don't know if it still shows here. Maybe we broke that. It used to, when a script was running, this little menu down here changed a couple years ago. But it used to be when a script was running, it would show you a little spinny thing here for when your user script was running. I'll file an issue and maybe get that fixed so I can show you next year. It's like, hey, check this out. This little spinny thing works again. But most of the time, actually, I just wasn't running it. Maybe it does work. Yeah, there it goes. Okay, so I just wasn't paying attention. So this is another way. If you see this little spinny guy running, it'll let you know that it's executing. So like if you're like, why is my Intellisense not working? First thing you can do is look down in that little menu and see that it's stuck. And then once your script finishes, you'll notice it'll stop and go back to normal. So that's a nice little tip for seeing that. So as far as the setup goes, that's kind of the main thing. And then finally, we have all of our settings that we can tune and tweak. So I have in my repository here, GitHub, Justin Grote, there's a special repository called .files. And I'll have the link for this later, and it's in that QR code and everything. Yes, question? So the question is there any reason for not just running everything in another PowerShell window? And the answer is that if you're just running a script that you don't care about, then absolutely do this other window, do the sleep 5000 here, whatever your long script is, and that will not affect your PowerShell session. And in fact, one thing we kind of recommend new people to do is there is a setting to basically not expose this session, so that if the reason we still expose this session is because again, it's that ISE compatibility, is that the people who are coming into VS Code, at least for the last 5 to 10 years, they're coming from PowerShell ISE. So they expect to see a REPL that when they do something here, it's going to show up there, it's going to have that experience. And we do everything we can to replicate that experience all the way up to the point that if you do PowerShell enable ISE mode, we make something that looks as close to PowerShell ISE as we can possibly do in VS Code. Like really trying to help people, come over into the fold. And while not everything works because there's just some stuff we can't do because it's not in process, that's just kind of what we're trying to do to sort of facilitate that. So that being said, there is an option in the PowerShell extension that you can do to sort of avoid this issue. And I think I got to remember where it is. I think it's under Editor Services. See, I went to all the. You may have noticed what's also new this year is that there's this nice little formatting. Like all this stuff has nice categories and that kind of thing. I went to all the trouble to do that to make it all nice and painstakingly nice. And now that I've done that, I can't find anything. It's like when you have your kitchen or your room, and it's like, oh, I know where all my laundry is and all that stuff. And then you clean up, partner or whatever cleans up your room, and you're like, now I can't find anything. I don't know where it is. That's what I've done to myself here. So it is, I believe, under terminal. Yeah. Yeah. So show on startup and start on background. So if you go ahead and check this box and restart, this will make it so that the terminal, it hides that extension terminal so that you don't have to worry about accidentally running anything in there. And all the debug stuff will work too. Like, if you do F5 and all that stuff to run debugs, all that stuff still continues to work as expected. And it will pop up once you start a debug. You'll see it comes up so you can see it there. But you can set it by default to not show the terminal. And we've kind of debated whether we want to hide that by default, because the ideal thing would be is that we hide that for new people, because then they wouldn't ever type things in there expecting it not to lock up the terminal. And then they just would have a much nicer experience. Ignorance is bliss. But then if we do that and people haven't set it initially, then suddenly they're like, where did my extension terminal go? And I don't know how to turn it on. And, we get 1,000 complaints in the repo. So maybe we'll figure that out. Maybe we'll do it for only net new installations. I don't know. But ideally, it's it's sort of Andy's opinion that we hide this as much as possible, because 90% of the issues we have is because people are mucking around in here. Because it's not something that is a part of any other extension. We're basically like exposing this very core low-level piece that everything else works, and giving you the rights to screw it about however you want. Load DLLs, all the problems with Microsoft Graph, where the other most common thing is like, hey, my script works in regular PowerShell, but it doesn't work in VS Code. And we fixed a lot of that stuff for what we can do on our side to hide the conflicts that make that happen. But ultimately, the people who write those modules have to do some work to hide those conflicts, especially with the Microsoft.identity assembly, and they don't do that. And because the PowerShell ISE because the VS Code extension is very greedy about, like, when you go to complete something, it will go try to find your module and opportunistically load that to be convenient. A lot of the times, it, in the process of doing that, causes some of those conflicts and that frustration. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. That's all in the extension authors, especially the AZ and the graph modules. Ideally, they would eventually hide that, at least just that one part of the identity, so that it doesn't do that. And if they do that work, everybody's lives will be easier, but that hasn't happened yet, so we can only hope. So as far as the editor goes, that's kind of your main aspect of how you want to get in and have things, and then you'll want to go through and tune tweak. So to go back to this, I have a repository. This is my .files. If you're not familiar with the concept of a .files repository, on the Linux side of things, and more on the Windows side of things, .files are sort of meant to sort of like hidden folders. Is that if you make a folder that's like .local or .config, then you don't normally see that folder. And so it's just a hidden place to keep settings. So .files is sort of now just this general term for like customization, tune, and tweak settings. So I use a tool called Chez Moi, which is a tool that is really nice. It's a .file manager, and what you do is it basically just lets you quickly download on any machine, and then do Chez Moi apply, and then just type in Chez Moi apply Justin Grote, and it will go out to my GitHub repository and grab all my .files, and then set up my computer with all those little .files. That set up all my little configuration stuff. So in that .files thing is and it's cross-platform, so there's a bunch of stuff like this template stuff where you can set up things where you can basically say, if Windows, put it in this place, if Linux, put it in this place. So if you see some of that weird .editor config and stuff, that's what all that means. And so one thing that I have in here, in my documents, is this app data down here, PowerShell. And I have, oh, no, that's not it, because I hide it in my config here. So I have my profile. So this is my profile if you ever want to see what I do for a profile. And so it's mostly just a few little shortcuts here and there. There's a lot of junk in here, but it's just little tunes and tweaks that I like for little shortcuts that I have, little preferences for how my coloring works, a bunch of visual customizations there, as well as a couple little quick tools, some quick shorthands for various commands that I use all the time because I don't want to type them all the way out. A few little fun little functions, that kind of a thing. So you can have that, and that profile stuff all works in VS Code the same way that it works in your regular session. So in addition to your default profile, VS Code has its own special profile for setting up things. And typically, I don't recommend you put anything in here unless it's something that's VS Code specific. And the one thing that I have in here is this thing called Import Command Suite. And so this is a tool called Editor Services Command Suite. This is made by Patrick Meineke, or SeeminglyScience, as you might know him, who is also on the PowerShell team, brilliant guy brilliant guy who does all kinds of work with the PowerShell repository itself and has contributed a lot to the PowerShell extension. And what this does is this gives you a bunch of additional little commands of little like extra code tips. Like if you want to take something and convert it from a command with parameters to splatting, like you just showed there, took a long command line and just was able to do a thing to convert it to splat. I'm hoping this year to be able to make that so that rather than having to do the menu at the top, you get the little light bulb to be able to do those things as little code refactorings and make that part a little more extensible. But this is more just to show you that you have the ability to go in and tweak the profile, and some of that profile stuff carries over into your VS Code so that you can manipulate and do whatever. So whatever you have in your normal terminal, you can have available in VS Code, including these fun little tools that let you enable to do all kinds of little things. You can write your own custom editor services tools, and this module will tell you all about how to do that. So that's a little more advanced than if you're like just getting started, but there's some really nice stuff in there that can really help with your workflows once you're really comfortable with VS Code. Nice little refactoring tools and such to do that. So then I want to, a couple preferences that I want to show off just for this session. One thing I want to show is that there's this new time. I showed the timeline view last time. Who's just not familiar with the timeline view? Who's just familiar with the timeline view? I don't want to single out people who. Okay, that's less hands than I would hope. So I'm going to show you, if you have not seen this, this is going to blow your mind. So if we go into just my demo folder here, go to D drive and hop on down. PSConfEU demo. I trust myself, I hope. So we'll go ahead and make a new PowerShell script here. Go ahead and save that. I'll do that, and then, do another thing here, whatever, do another thing. And then maybe I'm not paying attention. I'm trying to go to another menu, and I end up accidentally typing something in there, saving it, and now my script's broken. I'm like, oh, crap. And I wasn't using Git in this folder, and I didn't commit the change. Oh, crap. What do I do? If you go down here to timeline view, you have a view of every file in VS Code, everything you do, every file, every change in that folder, even if you're not using Git. Notice this folder is not initialized with Git. You have a timeline view that's like a Git for your files that VS Code does for you. So if you've ever been working on something and you were working on it and, you Control A, oh crap, save, oh no, I just lost 2 hours of work, you didn't lose it. It's right here. And you can go in here and see the file saved and see the differences. There it is. And you can see exactly the change in the history. That's awesome. It's there for you no matter where you are. Any folder you're in, if you're remoting to some server using VS Code remoting, if you're in code spaces, this is always on by default. You can turn it off if you want, but I don't recommend it. This has saved me so many times because I would make a change or I'm doing something. I'm in a large 5,000 line code thing. And maybe I was looking away or I was trying to do Control F in another program. I ended up typing an F into this file. And now all of a sudden my script is running some weird error. And I'm like, I don't know why it's throwing this error. And I can't figure it out. I can just go to timeline view, click and say, oh, this stupid thing threw a little F in there. And you can take it, you can revert it, you can select to compare, you can show the contents, you can compare different things. You get all that kind of Git kind of style stuff, but it's all there for free. So I highly recommend if you're not using timeline view, get comfortable with it and show your coworkers it, especially if they're juniors, because it will save them time, which saves you time, which saves your company money, blah, 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 blah. Timeline view is amazing. One of the best features in VS Code that, as shown here, very few people know about. Check it out. All right. So in addition to that, we have the ability to, let me just go ahead and show some of the new things that we have in VS Code these days. Let me go ahead and I'm just going to grab a random, let's go with ModuleFast, of course. Any chance I get to plug ModuleFast, I'm going to do it. So ModuleFast here, we have this, and we have a Git repository. And so if we go to our source code here, we have this new thing here called Graph. So this is new this year. In VS Code, we now have built-in functionality. If you used GitLens in the past or tools like that, you don't need a lot of that has been replaced with what's in VS Code. So VS Code actually has this nice view where you can see all the detail, the info from the pull request. You can go to each thing and go to the individual file and see the diffs. You get a lot of that sort of Git functionality that you might use a separate program like Git Kraken or use GitLens inside of this, or you might just be using GitHub on the web. All of that is now natively in Visual Studio Code, and you have all these options for fetching from remotes, merging, changing branches, refreshing. If you prefer a tree view, you can have that versus a list view. You have all this ability to now do a lot of Git type stuff without even knowing some Git command line stuff. So by doing that, now you have this really nice visual thing. So my favorite tool for this is also Git Graph, which shows a very sort of similar view. And there's some stuff that Git Graph, which is an extension, still does that this doesn't quite do. The biggest one being is sort of actions, doing things like being able to do rebases and checkouts and cherry picks. All of this you can do at the command line, and you can watch it do these things at the command line. But I still like, even though I know how to do most of this stuff at the command line, 99% of the time when I'm doing Git things like rebases and merges and stuff, I'm doing it here in Git Graph because I'm very visual and I like to be able to see the branch and then watch it merge in or watch it where it is there. It's a lot easier for me spatially to see. You know, you have command line tools to do all this, but I really like this interface. So if this is part of the extension pack, you'll see Git Graph down there for that. And so check that out if you get a chance. One other thing I'm going to enable, which is not enabled by default, if we go to our settings here, this is also new, is these blame editor decorations. So if you go ahead and check this box, which is currently not enabled by default, who here knows what git blame is? Great. Okay. So normally git blame, you're used to doing it at the command line, maybe finding it, maybe running it in GitHub and then waiting for GitHub to take like 5 minutes to load a giant file. So now what you can do, you used to need git lins or separate extensions. This is now built into VS Code. You can just check this box for git blame editor decorations. And now when I go to any file in my repository, I can click any line and you'll see on the right, I immediately get a blame of who made that change. So if you're in the code and you're like, what idiot, get down here, what idiot chose to throw here? It's like, oh, that was me 1 year ago in this commit. And you can get all that info and you can see the commit. You can go and open the commit on GitHub, type in a comment, please fix this, make it a new pull request, whatever. All of that is now built into VS Code, and it's not on by default. So if you didn't know that if you're not reading the release notes like I do, you wouldn't know this is here unless you really scan through the settings. So I just wanted to show you that this is some really great functionality that is now available. And I believe actually down here, this blame is on by default, but I really like the inline one because it's just much more in my face. Along with some of the extensions that I do, like AirLens. I really like I'm big on contextual stuff where I only want to see the stuff that's relevant to what I'm currently working on. So I want to have that view there and just have it right there so I can work on that and it's good. All right. One other thing that's really nice here that if you haven't seen it, this is new this year. This was the #1 pull request. And I talked about this last year, but there have been some improvements. Is that you can take anything now and rip it off, and now you can have separate windows. Yes, question? Yeah. So I was told that I was going to plug ModuleFast, and I stopped at the name. And like, why can't I stop there? You watch teaser trailers. It's like, what is the Matrix? What is ModuleFast? Find out yourself. No. You're going to make me turn this into a ModuleFast presentation. I hate you. ModuleFast, real quick, if you want to go to the thing, ModuleFast is a way to declaratively install modules very quickly. In fact, I feel like the logo speaks for itself. I'm just going to do this real quick. Actually, if I remember like the gallery search was busted again as of this morning. So let's see if they fixed it yet. Yeah, okay, it's fixed. Okay. Oh, I didn't fix it in my new. So is it going to do it? Is it going to do it? No, it's not going to do it. So I pushed this used to do a fancy logo thing. Never mind. Forget what I said. I was very proud of that. Now that's broken, so never mind. So I feel like the logo sort of says it all. It's a very fast and loose way to install PowerShell modules. It's designed to basically, if you define a module and go through and you can declare like in a declarative way, kind of like you do with Terraform or Ansible or whatever. You can declare what modules you want installed, and it will install modules extremely fast. Like it will do it in parallel. I have my own PowerShell gallery mirror that uses Cloudflare on the front. Basically, the short version is that if you've ever done install PS resource AZ, it takes like 15 minutes. PowerShell does it in 7 seconds. On a like 32 core 64 gig machine because I have it optimized to the point that it doesn't really bottleneck. So like the more horsepower you throw at it, the faster it is. It's a really fast way to install modules. It's really good for GitHub Actions, that kind of thing, getting them really quick. Check it out. It's got a GitHub action, blah, blah, blah. Check that out. All right. That's more than I should have spent anyways. So then back to being able to tear off windows. You have this nice way to tear off windows. And one of the nice things that has been improved here is you have a more compact view. So if you turn on this compact mode, you get this really nice sort of tight view of a window. And you can do this not just with editors, but you can do it with terminals. So if you have like a PowerShell window, you can have your now PowerShell window as a separate editor window. And it's not as impressive on one screen, but if you have multiple monitors or an ultra wide, this is much more useful, because if you've ever used VS Code in the past, you know that you just have like your one VS Code and you couldn't go outside the window. You had to open another VS Code if you want on two windows. And so that was fixed about a year ago. But there's been a lot of improvements made to it, including like this ability to pin them and then being able to turn on and off this nice little compact mode. The other new thing that you can do is you have this ability for anything that's on an output pane. For instance, like the PowerShell extension, you can now take this guy and pull him out, which I think you have to do it with the output pane itself, the whole thing. Nope, that one has to go here. It used to. What did I do wrong? Oh, I'm probably not on it. Come on, make me look bad. Yeah, there we go. Open editor, open output, new window. So now you can get any logs that you have in the output pane showing there. Which segues to a nice thing that I want to show here is that this year, one of the things that I did in the PowerShell extension was revamp all the logging infrastructure for how PowerShell logs what it does. The initial impetus for that was to remove a particular library called Serolog, which caused conflicts with a lot of modules. So if you were using things like Graph and whatnot or other modules, a lot of times you'd get this error that said like Serolog was already loaded or whatever. So I rewrote everything so that we didn't need that anymore. But in the process, I also very much improved how you can see what's going on in the PowerShell extension. So by default, you get this very light, you don't need to get a lot of detail unless something goes wrong, like here the PowerShell extension stopped, etc. Oh, and of course I want to, real quick, get my crisp logs analyzer back up. Let's get that back in there. Okay, so now look, my logs are much more prettier. That's what that extension does, is it makes all the logs much prettier. And so in here, I have a view of everything going on in terms of the extension, but there's now this option over here, this is new this year, is all VS Code logs now have this sort of more advanced logging infrastructure if wherever that log comes from chooses to implement it. So like some of these, if you go to them, that's a bad example. I think editor, yes, like this one hasn't implemented that new interface, but we have. So if you go here, you can go here and increase the log level to like trace. And then if I'm doing a new PowerShell thing, this is running a trace, isn't it? Oh, I do have to restart. Reload this window. Bump trace. Why are you not doing your thing? Oh, I know it. So first thing you have to do here, this is something that I do still need to fix, is that if you go down here to the PowerShell settings, there is a thing for logging. And then you go ahead and turn on this trace debug adapter protocol, as well as turn on trace the server. And then once you restart that, we should get our nice little additional logs here. There we go. So now you can see here with this trace LSP, if you go down here the debug level, which we'll start with, when you do things in the PowerShell extension, you can see everything that the PowerShell extension is doing. So let me just hide that side view there. So if I'm doing something up here, like I'm typing, you'll notice this kind of gives you an idea of what the PowerShell extension is always doing. So if I'm just typing, all I have to do is if I start here and clear it. Oh, that's why my filter was on. That whatever. So if I'm doing something here and I just hitting space, you can see all the things that happen whenever you hit space. Is like find the folding range, find the code lens, document symbol. This is all the stuff that's happening in the background between VS Code and the little piece of PowerShell that runs the whole editor services. That is what powers the PowerShell extension. So if you're trying to debug something and trying to figure out why does this thing not work, you can very quickly come in here and see more detail about what's going on, including any errors. So if your script has locked the session, you'll see in here that it's sent, but it's still waiting on the other side. And you can crank this all the way up to trace. And then when you do that, you get all the detail of what's going on, including the little JSON messages going back and forth. So just to show this example of everything that happens in the VS Code extension, which is why sometimes it might feel a little slow, even though it normally isn't, is just by hitting that E and getting this completion menu, this is everything that happened. Look at my scroll bar on the right. Like, this is everything that happened just by typing E. Because this is everything that has to happen in terms of getting that, finding it. Here's all these completion items getting created, finding the functions, getting all that information. It lets you see everything that's going on there. So, luckily this is all optimized. It's all super fast, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes to make this as seamless as possible. One of the big things about the PowerShell extension to always remember is that one of the sort of design goals of the PowerShell extension is to effectively just be a UI on top of PowerShell. So when a lot of people are like in the repo, they're like, oh, why doesn't the PowerShell extension do this? And a lot of times we'll say, because that needs to exist in PowerShell first. And then they're like, well, you could just do it in the extension. It's like, well, we could, but if we did that, we'll do our own implementation, and then the PowerShell team will come up with some other implementation, and now we have to support both, and we have to figure out how to rig those things together. It's just much easier for them to first put it in PowerShell, and then we can sort of just present it out. So when you do a write host and you do control space and you get this info, this is literally the same info as if you had typed write host control space, and that information that's down there. It's literally the exact same API on the back end that the extension calls. So the nice thing about that is that we get a lot of functionality for free by doing that. So my favorite one that I like to demo that I showed last year, but if you haven't seen this, this is pretty neat, is that if you have something that's like write host, and I'm going to do $splat equals write host at splat. So this is splatting. I'm sure most people are familiar with it. If you do this, and now you have your splat here, check this out. Your splat now has auto completions for the parameters of the command. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Blow that up a bit. So again, I have a splat. So as long as you define what the command is down there, now you can do this, and it can know what the parameters are. So your splat gets auto completion, which is great. And if I change this to invoke REST method, and I go to the splat here, hit control space. Now I have all the invoke REST method parameters. So now just to show you that this is not, So credit for that doesn't come from me. Credit for that comes from Martin GC94. They are a fantastic contributor to the PowerShell repo. And I just want to show you something here is that if I go here and do the exact same thing, I can probably copy paste this if I don't mess it up and run it. It shouldn't run. Yeah. Okay. So if I go up here. No, it didn't do it right. Splat. Should be able to control space. Yeah. So this works in the PowerShell terminal too. This is not because we're literally just calling the same thing. So you'll notice that even if you're doing it the command line, this kind of action works. And there's all kinds of completions and type completions and all that kind of stuff. I would recommend watching last year's recording if you want to see a lot more of that kind of stuff in detail. But that's some of the things I just want to demonstrate that the main thing about the PowerShell extension is that everything that it does, it tries to do as thinly as possible and just be a layer between what PowerShell is doing and what you see in the UI. But we try to make sure that anything that you can see in Visual Studio Code, you can do at the command line. So an example of that too is that whenever you're running something and you're making a change, how are we doing? We're doing good. Whenever you're running something and you make a change, if you do something that, so like when that thing came up, If I go to the output, I'm going to drop this trace to, I can probably find it. Analysis. So every time you make a change and the error window and the error completions show up, every time you do that, script analyzer is running in the background. Every single time you'll be able to, if you have this trace on, you'll be able to see every time you make any little change, it takes whatever you were writing and sends it to PS Script Analyzer. And here's PS Script Analyzer coming back saying didn't have any violations. So all those sort of rules and such that are customized, there's nothing in VS Code or the PowerShell extension that defines those rules. It all comes from Script Analyzer. So if you define custom Script Analyzer rules and you load them, you will get that IntelliSense in PowerShell. You can write your own rules and have them available in VS Code. So that gives you all those possibilities there. Another one of the things that's on like my big to-do list, which is probably to the top of that screen, is I want to rewrite this so that it has sort of a more pluggable analysis engine so that you can use PS Script Analyzer, but you'd also be able to use this sort of more flexible interface to inject any kind of analysis that you want. So hopefully, again, another one of those next year things that you guys can all check me next year. Did you do this? I'm like, no. Did you do that? No. Did you do that? Yes, I did do that. I did get that done. So this aspect with the logging is really nice, and it also works with the debug adapter. So if you're just getting started, you've never like really done any of the kind of debugging, I can set a breakpoint there, and I can go to the run over here, and you can do run and debug, and it'll work. So one of the things is that if you go over here for the configurations under PowerShell, a lot of these have been rewritten. So a lot of these are now actually much more useful, that if you just want to do something, you're able to just pick one, and it'll go ahead and give you the info as well as like, where do you want to put it? Do you want to put it in your user settings or do you want to put it in actual ModuleFast? So if I choose user settings and I flip this to JSON, you'll see that it didn't do it. We'll see that it didn't do it. Let's try it again. So I go here, settings. Oh, it's because now I created it. It should be in there. Oh, is this my old settings? Flip it. Why did it not put it in? Okay, well, typically what will happen is it'll show up in here as a debug configuration. And you'll be able to, you can have debug configurations that live in your profile. So as you go from place to place, so I have some that I have in default that are like for interactive session and whatnot, but we have some of those built in here. So interactive session is the one I usually recommend that I like the most, because that just lets you go ahead and just start a session and then do whatever. You can type wait debugger in a session as you want and have it fail apparently. Oh no, it's because I didn't have a script loaded. Oh, I really made it mad. The beer just full on hard locked on me. All right, that's great for a demo. All right, well, while I reboot my computer, one of the really nice things here is that with the debugging, what you can do is with those different debug profiles, you have the ability to, like, if you're writing C# modules, you can debug those into a separate window. So you can have a whole separate terminal that will go ahead and make it, because one of the annoying things about making binary modules is anything that you load is now stuck there for the session. So the second time you go to run it, if you make a change, you don't see the change unless you completely kill the PowerShell window and come back. So we give you a way to sort of automate that process where you can choose this option to launch in a temporary window, and it will go ahead and start up a whole separate PowerShell every time you hit debug, so that you can make sure that you're not bringing over any changes from your sort of typical window that you're in. And a new feature that I have added that's not been released yet in the next release that comes out is you'll be able to select which session you use. So you'll be able to, in the main PowerShell window, use PowerShell like 7.4 or whatever, which is what we recommend. We want your little PowerShell session menu to always be on PowerShell 7, because that lets us do a lot of stuff for you much faster and nicer than PowerShell 5.1 in the editor. But if you want to test against PowerShell 5.1, you'll have the options for that one of those debug menus. Are we good? All right, we're good again. You'll have the option in that debug menu to go ahead and start it in a temporary window, but be able to tell that that temporary window runs Windows PowerShell. Today, you have to switch your main one to Windows PowerShell to do that kind of testing. But once it comes out, you'll just be able to add this little session name option, and you'll be able to, whenever you run debug, have it run in a separate Windows PowerShell, but give you all the full debugging stuff on the front end. Oh, now it's mad at me. And I also logged into the wrong profile. And just switch here. That's the only annoying thing is I always do my fingerprint out of habit, and then it always logs into the wrong one. So there we go. With the debugging too, there's a nice new thing called dependent breakpoints. Let's see if I can get that up here real quick. And I just opened my, this is my it's going to do all this stuff again too. Let's go back to my demo one here. And this is just as a side thing to show you here. This is 2 different VS Codes, sort of like my sort of normal one that's on my desktop, and then the little isolated, data folder one. You could run them side by side, which is kind of a nice thing too if you're doing that kind of like testing. So you can see like here's this one with all these kind of settings and stuff, and this different profile, and then there's this one that's running in that data folder. All right, so let's try to do that debug again. If we do a run. We save this as a file just for fun. All right, put this guy there. Launch current file. Okay, so now we're running, we're debugging. One other thing you might notice is that the debugging here, in terms of if you've used this before, the debugging is way faster. I made a change here to kind of just do a little magic here to make this so that when you're stepping through debugging, it works way faster than it used to. And so one thing you can do is, in addition to all the variables and everything you have over here, there's this new option for dependent script blocks. So to do this, 1.100. That should work. Just run that real quick. Okay. So what you can do is you can say, you can, what do I want here? So you can first set a conditional breakpoint. So like if you have a loop of something, you have like 100. If you've ever like worked with a bunch of records, you're like looping through users or you're looking through something and one of the users breaks and it's really annoying to have to step through all the time to try to find where it is. You can set these breakpoints and you can set an expression to say only break when we get to this record. So here I'm just going to do, $_ = 33, but you could just easily say like where last name equals Smith or whatever. So that when you run this script and test, it'll go through, but it'll only stop once it hits that. And then what you can do is that if you have even more complex code where like you have the situation where this other code only breaks in this loop here, then what you can do, and this works across files and whatnot, you can do this thing for a conditional breakpoint, or triggered breakpoint, You can do this thing for a triggered breakpoint, and you can say wait for breakpoint, and then specify the other breakpoint that you specified. And you'll notice when you hover over it, it shows you like what that breakpoint was. And so what that'll do is that makes it so that breakpoint only triggers when the other breakpoint is hit. So it's less impressive in like this loop, but it's more like if you have like a real nested code where like when you get to this user, it then calls this thing, which goes over here, which goes over here, which goes to this thing, and then in here is where I know my problem is. I don't want to have to stop here and then step. I want it to stop there, and then the next time I hit run, hit that breakpoint. But I don't want it to hit that breakpoint every single time. I only want to hit it once it's hit that one. So this is where these triggered breakpoints come into handy. And the reason I show this not only because of how neat it is that this is part of the benefit of using Visual Studio Code as the primary is much like with PowerShell, how you get this stuff for free just by using PowerShell 7. Stuff is faster, stuff is more reliable without you having to change your code. We didn't do anything to make this work. Because we use the standard APIs that VS Code uses, they implemented this triggered breakpoint feature, but there's nothing in the way that VS Code talks to PowerShell that had to change. So when they lit up this feature, it just worked. We didn't have to push a new version of the PowerShell extension to make this work. And there's all kinds of stuff like that in terms of Copilot, etc., that allows those abilities to happen. One other thing I want to show here, which you've probably seen. Yes. It works using the Pester Test. I mean, Rob, I didn't even know you were there. So, like, how am I supposed to know what your question was? Sorry. So the question was, with the conditional breakpoints and stuff like that, does that work in Pester tests? And the answer is yes. Whether you run them using the built-in code lens in the PowerShell extension or you're using my Pester Tests extension, in both of those cases, it's still just a debug process. And so, just like, when you're in the matrix, all the rules of the matrix apply. It's the same deal. Is that when you're running a debug on a Pester test, you can set all those dependent breakpoints. So if you have a Pester test that loops through things, you can set it so that I only want to debug it and I only want to stop when you get to this particular thing that's failing in the Pester test. So yes, that is a thing you can do. And as well as you have the option for log points. So, a common thing to do is, when you're debugging things is you like write host $_ so I can see what the record was. Rather than doing that, you can do this thing. I'm just going to do hi here. I'm just to demonstrate. You can do this thing called log points. So you can add a log point and say the record is, you got to do these to show that you're doing code there. And what that'll do is you have this little triangle there. That'll make it so it will log in the output pane, the debug console rather, whenever it hits that log point, it'll run that. So rather than having to use write host statements to see what happened at that time, you can just do that. And if I go ahead and run this, so you'll see that it showed down here as well because I had it, the way that we do it in the Pesters, we show it down in the terminal as well. It should be, no, it doesn't show there. I forgot that we moved it. But this is a way that you can have logging without having to change your code. So if you're debugging or you're testing somebody else's thing and you're worried about putting in a write host and more importantly, forgetting to remove that write host later and then it goes to production, it's like, why is this weird extraneous message there? This is a way to avoid that, is you just right click there and say add log point. And now you can see in your log of like what that should have been. And it shows up there. And there's some more detail that you get there about the $_ ends up being the breakpoint at that point. And there's some other detail you can do to get even more detail about what's going on there. All right, I wanted to show a little bit of Copilot. There's if you've looked at the release notes. Oh, yes, question. Yes.
Always have, I said breakpoints. And I type something into the terminal. Set 5.
Mm-hmm.
Those breakpoint stops and sets a focus.
Okay.
I want to see the variable and type output. I always kill my line. Because the focus always goes.
So the question, and let me paraphrase, let me know if I got this right, is that when you're debugging and you mark something, if you're in the terminal, you're looking at the terminal, and when you debug and it hits a breakpoint, it goes to the source code, and that's what takes over your view, or? Yeah.
Type or 8. And because the line is selected, it writes.
Okay, so the concern is that like if I'm in source code, this is bad. Here, let's do this. We'll make this just a big long. So what you want is like when you're like here is like let's do even better. Let's do $A = 5. So you want to, let me take all these breakpoints out of here. Sorry for all the short sentences. Let me just clear all these breakpoints out. I'll just disable all the breakpoints for now, and we'll set a breakpoint here. And then we will run that. Okay, so you're here. If I was like here and you want to see this, right?
I would like to enter $A into terminal, but the focus stays.
Oh, I see. So like you were in the terminal down here, and when you hit the run, it changes the focus so that now if you went to type, you're in the top here and not the bottom. Because of the way that the VS Code, there are because of the way that the extension, like we might be able to enable an option for that, file an issue, and we can look at it as an enhancement request. However, what I would recommend you do instead is, have you ever used this watch view over here on the right, on the left? Are you familiar with this? Check this out. So I can do a plus here. But you could. So what? I could just do so I'm going to stop here. So without having to look there, I can go ahead and hit run, launch, and when I get there, I know right away what my variable is without even having to type it. And you can, as you go loops, and it'll show you. It'll do a little highlight, like if actually let's add PS item here, or $_ whatever. So every time I run a loop, you'll see it highlights and shows you while it changes, which is pretty great. So I would recommend you do that. I feel like for me that's more intuitive. However, if that's something that you want, maybe we can look. Maybe it's an easy thing that we can add. So, yes. Yeah, same thing. So if I do $A, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's literally this again, same thing. Like, so I did some work on this part. So this auto and the command and stuff. So this has all of your variables where you are at this point in the code, so you can look at them. And watch is just a way to add those. And you can do things like, you can do get random. Like, it doesn't have to be just a variable. It can be any expression, so you can see what that current thing is at that time. Yeah. Oh, you mean the wonderful? So the question is, isn't there also the inline values extension by the wonderful, magnanimous, fantastic Tyler Leonhardt, who used to be a PowerShell extension contributor? Yes. In fact, you'll see I have it installed here, which will just simply show you inline next to the variable where it is. So this is a built-in VSCode feature that he just wrote the plumbing for. It's a separate extension. We could just take that and bring it into the PowerShell extension natively. We just haven't really had a reason to do it. I mean, it works fine. There's some inline values stuff that we want to bring in too that we haven't done yet. But yeah. So this is a great extension too, that if you want to see it on the line, it doesn't really solve that problem, because when you hit the breakpoint, you're down here. Now you got to scroll back up. Hence why I said the watch is the better way to do it. But you have, again, one of the great things about VS Code is however your brain works, however it's easiest for you to do these things, you can, have whatever view works for you. There's a great extension called, I wonder if it'll work right now. There's a great extension called Debug Visualizer, which will, because it uses the same general, I'll get your question in a second. When you have it'll show you like a visual view of like the variables, and like if something changes, it'll like spatially move them in this window. It's pretty neat. It's called Debug Visualizer. I can probably pull it up here on the list here, but that's a fun one. Let's see if we can. I think he has a video. Yeah. So like as you step through, see how it, like for an array, it'll show like how the array objects move in order in the thing as you change the array. It's pretty neat. And I haven't used it in a while because that's just not that useful to me. But to some people, that's super useful. It should work with PowerShell because it just uses the standard debugging stuff. Yeah. Question.
Breakpoints on the .NET functions, the same what you would in Visuals to do alongside the
Thanks to me. So the question is, can you set C# breakpoints right next to PowerShell ones in the PowerShell debugger? And the answer is, thanks to me, yes, you can. I merged a change this year that it's in those these options you have for the launch profiles. See these ones for binary module? So I'm going to go ahead and, okay, this time it actually put it where I wanted it to. So basically there's this new option here for attach .NET debugger, that if you run this in the temporary console, I don't think I have a C# that I can pull up here real quick. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. But basically, like what you can do is that if you do that one, then you can launch your script. And so you enter this, the command that imports your binary module and then runs it. So like in here, you would do like, for an example, in my case, like import Excel fast, export Excel fast thing. And when you do that, if you have a breakpoint in your C# code, once it comes through and it hits your PSCMDlet, and then it gets to that method, yeah, all the breakpoints work. Because what it'll do, the way that it works is that you have your PowerShell session that starts. PowerShell is just a .NET application. And so when you select that attach .NET debugger, there's some magic that happens in the background, the PowerShell extension, that basically it starts that up, waits for it to start, and then it does the attach function in the C# extension. It tells the C# extension, hey, do an attach, and attach is a child debugger. So you'll see, I think I demoed that last year, so you might be able to see it on the presentation last year. But I know there's stuff on my either my Blue Sky or my Twitter that shows it. But basically, yeah, you can do that, and then you'll be able to debug both PowerShell and the C# at the same time. So you can step through the PowerShell code, and then when it gets to your C#, it'll immediately jump over to where it is in the C# it is. It's really slick, and I highly recommend it. Yeah, follow up. I don't know if the question is, can you enable like native assembly, like mixed code debugging? Can you do that in the C# extension in Visual Studio Code? I don't know if you can. Well, we're not talking about Visual Studio right now, are we? I mean, theoretically, what you could do is that once it hits that breakpoint, you can attach whatever debugger you want. You know the process ID, so you could attach a native one at that point. You know, and the program will stop. So I don't know if it'll work, but you could try it. Smarty pants. I don't get that far. Managed code is black box. No, thank you. It's like that's you and Jordan's job. That's not my job. All right. One quick thing that if you haven't seen it, it's a small thing and it's really useful in long scripts. So ModuleFast is one long, gigantic script for a reason. But one of the things here is you'll see at the top here, notice how stuff is sticking there. This is called sticky scroll. So it basically gives you little breadcrumbs to show you where you're at in the process of the script. And so it's just kind of a nice little easy way to sort of see where you're at, like which function you're in, which item you're in. So there's convert from PCS resource kit. I know that I'm in this function when I'm just looking at this code. It's a nice, handy little visual. You can turn it off if you don't like it, like most things in Visual Studio Code. I think that this is enabled by default now. Yeah, but yeah, it's real nice. And like most things in Visual Studio Code, if you do sticky scroll, there's all kinds of options to tune and tweak it to get it just the way that you want it. Did I put it out there? So no, I don't think I did. So I have my VSCode settings file, which is like 800 different settings that's like tuned and tweaked for me for the things that I like. That QR code that was up there, and I can bring it up again. It will be in that repository. Give me 1 second here. I don't think I put the latest version up there yet, but I will get it out there so that for that link we will do that. And we're just going to do a couple links here real quick before we wrap up with questions. I don't care, Copilot. Leave me alone. Some Copilot good, others bad. All right, so for that QR code again, that'll link to the GitHub with the slides. That'll have links to all these previously presentations. Oh, sorry for anybody who was doing that. So that'll link to, if you go to where all those previously slides are, there's links to each of those YouTubes on the various PowerShell Summit and PSConfEU and wherever I was doing the presentation at the time. To sort of go, if you want to go back and see like some more details in this stuff, see some more. Obviously, like, you know, maybe I'll convince Gail to make this a 5-hour presentation sometime and we just do it all, but sadly that's not the way. And then this will also be in that sheet, which is, this is where I find new stuff. There's the Visual Studio Code updates log, which is just the change log of new stuff that's coming out. It's 95.9% Copilot stuff these days. The PowerShell for VS Code changelog is there. There hasn't been a lot new this year with the PowerShell extension. That's not because there's not a lot of work going on. Andy Jordan, who is the primary maintainer of that, has done a huge, like, metric ton amount of back-end, like, supply chain stuff. So, in short, I don't have any insider information, but my guess is the whole SolarWinds supply chain thing really spooked Microsoft. And there's been a big mandate that like everything in Microsoft, dependency chain, supply chain attacks, that's all got to be inner-sourced. And so Andy has been taking on the Herculean task of locking all that stuff down, making it work, you know, hundreds and hundreds of hours, I'm sure. But, you know, that's stuff that makes us all secure, the Microsoft Artifact Registry and stuff, just trying to make sure that what we have is secure and safe, and we don't ever want to have any of those major breaches if we can have it. So there hasn't been a lot of like new fancy whiz-bang stuff, but there has been a ton of stability work, a ton of bug fixes, that kind of thing. That a lot of that stuff, I'm hoping we're going to be able to do some more fancy stuff. I'm hoping to have some more time to add in some features that I've been wanting to add for a while. Rename support's top of that list. There is a build out there if you want to try like the F2 rename like you can do in every other language. Unfortunately, because PowerShell is not strongly typed, that's really hard to do. But we did come up with a way to do it reasonable. In order to do that, there is a special build out on the GitHub page for the VSCode PowerShell that you can install, and you can do the whole F2 rename where you can rename functions, you can rename variables, and it does it in a smart way that it doesn't clobber things. It only works within a single file, but it's pretty slick, and I'm pretty happy with it. It was a lot of work to make work, but it works pretty good. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to take some time to get that stabilized and merged in for next year. Okay, there was one, what was it? I just thought of it in my head and I forgot what it was. No, whatever. So I was thinking of doing a little bit on Copilot. The big thing I want to mention is just Copilot now has a free tier. If you haven't ever used GitHub Copilot, it now has a free tier. It's like you get like 2,000 completions and that kind of thing. And for me, like Copilot is really slick for certain things that you can work on. I don't think I'm logged into Copilot yet. No, I don't think I have it enabled in this chat here. I've been a real big fan of the edits mode in Copilot. Do I have to switch to my other one? I probably do. Is it enabled there? It's probably not even installed and ready to go yet. Control. Yes, maybe. Okay, good. I'm logged in there. No, I'm not logged in. I'll enable that. So I'll just give my quick opinion on the models. There's the new Claude Sonnet 4, which came out. That's both pretty fast, and like 3.5 had generally been my personal favorite for PowerShell. 3.7 was pretty nice, but it tended to be a little more overly verbose than I wanted. It tended to like go like way more Byzantine than I wanted it to with solutions. And 4's been a pretty good kind of balance of those. But what's included with Copilot by default, though most of these, like I've never hit the limit on any of these if you have a paid subscription for Copilot. The 4.1 and the 4.0 models, the 4.1 is sort of like the default, what I would recommend you use, because it's pretty fast. Like it does a good job, and you have these different modes between ask, agent, and edit. The main difference between these is ask is read-only. Ask is just ask it something. Really useful if you just want to know how something works, how a certain method works. Edit was a huge game changer when it came out for me about 6 months ago, because whereas you have like the inline chat that and that you can do that, this inline part really only kind of works on a file and it has limited context. The edit one can take your whole code base and work across multiple files. So what edit got really good at was like, if I want to generate Pester Tests for some code that I just wrote, excellent at that. If I want to generate some boilerplate of a new module, excellent at that. And then what agent mode is, beyond that, is what agent mode does is agent basically takes that sort of edits model of being able to work across your entire code base. And I don't know why that toggle's not working, but is able to take that view of your entire code base and work in an iterative way, so that rather than just do one prompt and then check it and see if it's okay, try a few different things and even offer commands to run, like allow it to do a Pester test and then try to run the Pester test. And if an error happens, read in that error message, then try to figure out how to fix it. And for the most part, like it's been working really well for me. There's several projects that I have done completely in. I've written 2 VSCode extensions pretty much just in GitHub Actions. So one is the GitHub rate limit extension. This extension I wrote with 2 prompts in agent mode. One to do the scaffolding and another to kind of clean things up. So in 2 prompts, I made this extension that will sign into your GitHub. We'll go ahead and we'll tell it to do that. Watch it just break right away, which is not a great demo. Does it not like me? Am I not logged in here? Let's try reloading. Come on, load. Oh, you're killing me. Oh, I gotta do it over here. That's right. And I don't. Restart extension host. Are you there? Why did you uninstall yourself? Oh, did I switch profiles? I probably did. So far, this is not the... There we go. Okay. None of that was the extension's fault. So you can see down here, I can see in real time my GitHub rate limits, because I'm usually doing a bunch of stuff with the GitHub API that sometimes I like max it out with stuff with like pull requests and that kind of thing. So I can see in real time what all my GitHub limits are. I did this in 2 commits. I did one to create a VS Code extension that does this, that does this. It was probably a prompt about this long, and it generated everything, the whole code base, the VS Code, the resource JSON, the TypeScript to do it. And then the second commit was just to basically like, it originally just output it in lines. And the second one commit, I was basically like, make this a table. And then that was it. And I was like, okay, great. And I reviewed the code. I'm like, yeah, this is pretty much how I would have written it, and then publish it. So that's an example of something that you can just make with it. Another one that I made was, I don't know, do I have to go to myself because I can't even remember? What was the other one that I made with this? Oh, yes. The GitHub Actions Enhanced. So the GitHub Actions extension has kind of languished for a bit. And so I made my own version of it that has a bunch of, like, I made a bunch of pull requests to them. None of the pull requests got merged, so I just made my own extension. And a lot of the things that I enhanced here, I developed using the agent mode and the edits mode, where I told it, I want to do this, and I want it to be able to use the testing API. So if you, this is probably not going to come up right for ModuleFast. Let's see if it does. Where's my actions? Here we go. Yeah, maybe. Okay, so one thing is that this used to have different icons. Now it uses the same icons as the testing API. Like it uses the native icons. So if you change your theme, is there a theme that has icon? Yeah, maybe it's icon theme. None of these themes have different icons. Does Dracula have them? That one kind of has different icons. Anyways, like if the icons were different, it stays themed with the icons. It's also much better at not completely blowing away your GitHub rate limit as the old extension does. I did some things to fix things to automatically pull and that kind of thing. And so that makes that so that it's really fast and efficient in that regard. And it's just an example of a couple things that, while and ModuleFast, there's a lot of stuff in ModuleFast, as well as a new module that I wrote called ExcelFast that, a lot of which the initial scaffolding, like in ExcelFast, this was all done with Copilot as well. So if I don't have opening code here, do I? Nope, maybe there. So this module, as far as the infrastructure, the not so much the build scripts, which I did, but in terms of a lot of the initial code for ExcelFast, which is, I'm not used to this view. Sorry, I'm very much out of my element. If any of you know me, I like my sidebar on the right and all my different colors, and so I'm living outside my usual here. Plus, I'm using a trackpad, which I'm terrible with. Why is my ExcelFast source not there? Well, it's all deleted, I guess. Where'd you go? All right. Well, anyhow, wherever let's go out to the GitHub for it. Anyways, the code for ExcelFast, which this is just a new module that I'm working on. The short version is like if you go to import a 1,000,000-line Excel file today, if you try to do it with import Excel, it just won't work. It's too big. If you do it with ExcelFast, it takes 12 seconds. And it's streaming, so you can do ExcelFast. You do import Excel, pipe select first 5, and it'll happen in a millisecond because it's streaming, so it'll only read as much of the files as necessary. Here I go plugging my modules that have nothing to do with VS Code. But the point just being is that that's an extension that I wrote in using Copilot for like 95% of it, and then just like tune and tweak the rest. Like it's getting pretty good at it. Those kind of things. Yeah. No. So the question is for ExcelFast, do I need Excel installed? Come to my... Let's see. We'll find some room, and I'll just demo. I'll have all my miscellaneous crap. Open stage. There you go. Yeah, I'll just commandeer the open stage, and I'll just go through all this stuff. Yeah. If you want to see, since we have plenty of time here, it's just in pre-release now. I have a quick demo here. See that I love my blurry logos for my fast stuff. So But I know I have a demo on Blue Sky that shows it working, but basically it's just, yeah, like if you do this, it's pretty simple, and you can also do edits and that kind of thing. It's still very early. There's not a lot of docs, but it works pretty great. It's very, very fast and very low memory. And so that's Excel fast. So getting back to VS Code, I remember the one thing that I want to show. So this is something that's not in the settings, and this is something that I only found out about. This is my custom one. So let's go to without all the other stuff. Yeah, here we go. So this one might be a game changer for some people too. So normally when you're editing, you got these, and you got this over here, and you got this over here, and you're trying to do stuff, and you're doing stuff in your terminal, and it's real kind of cramped. So there's this new option. By new, I mean like been there for like 3 years, but new to me, is you can go here and you can choose this align panel and choose justify. And now your terminal is the full width, and the sidebars, the terminal takes width precedence over the sidebars. So especially if you have like an ultra wide monitor or anything like that, now you have this, and you can do, split terminals and get a much better view of what's going on, and have your terminals much easier to work with, rather than and still be able to have your sidebars here, which can show up here, and hide one sidebar and hide the other. Those all still work as expected, but this part's justified all the way out. So unfortunately, that's not a VS Code set. There's no like JSON setting to do that. It's just a simple like sort of check mark for aligning, and you can do center, right, whatever. But this justify one, I love. I think it's pretty great. So yeah, definitely, if you like to have a nice, good, lots of terminal to see what you're doing, install that one. All right, so that's where I mostly wanted to land. I'll go ahead and go with questions about anything on VS Code or anything you want me to demo, and maybe I'll just go ahead and switch back to my comfy VS Code so you can see it, and then I can show you my VS Code and stuff, and you can point at stuff and be like, how'd you do that? I think we have 15 minutes left, I think, right? Yeah. I'll get you in 1 second. Let me just... Oh no, did I setting sync? Oh, that's not good. Give me mine. Did I mess up my profile? I totally probably messed up my profile testing this stuff. All right, well, let's do this. All right, well, good enough. Okay, so yeah, question.
In a nutshell, I know you mentioned a couple of ways how you can configure VS Code, but what would you recommend for someone to do that is as easy as can get to get all these settings in VS Code? Can you take that data folder and just put the JSON files in it and then close everything else?
Yeah, so the question is like, what's the easiest way to just get somebody started up? The big thing is that profiles view that I showed earlier. Let's go to profiles editor. Let's just go down here to do it. Oh, this is why I'm not saying. Okay, whatever. Profiles. So once you have like one that's all set up the way that you want, let me just minimize this stuff here. Hide all the things. So once you have a profile that's like set up the way that you want, you can choose this and you can choose export. And then once you export it, then you have a file that's just a code profile file. That's just a text. It's literally just a JSON file. So if I save that to my desktop here and open this guy up, I can't remember if it's a binary file or not. I don't think it is. No, it's not. No, I meant to open that in VS Code. These are already used. You can't use those. Don't worry about them. So yeah, so it's just a JSON file. It's going to have a lot of crap in here if you open it in VS Code, but you don't usually edit this manually. But basically, once you export it, see, now you have this JSON file that you just give to somebody, say, import this profile, and they'll get all the extensions. It can include your view state. It can include all your custom settings and anything like that. As of today, this is probably the easiest way to like just get somebody set up, is like you define a profile, export it, and have them import that code workspace profile.
To then add Git support as well. Currently, it's an external cumbersome installation that you have to trigger. Is there an extension that does it for you too?
So the question is like, what's the easiest way to add Git support? Is there an extension to do it? I don't know if there's an extension. Yeah, really, it just comes down to you just have to have Git installed on your machine using whatever method you prefer. WinGit is probably the easiest way. The nice thing is if you haven't been, I don't know if Demetrius's session on WinGit is today or tomorrow, but I would definitely check out. Demetrius is the WinGit lead. He's a great guy. And one of the things about WinGit is there is now I don't know if I have it installed on this one. Basically, WinGit has all of its has a PowerShell interface now, so you can install WinGit package. I don't know if I don't think just Git works. Maybe it does. You'll probably find it. But the WinGit stuff, you don't have to use the WinGit CLI anymore. It's got all the sorry. That's right. If I do -ID, that'll help. Do all the extra stuff there. What did I do wrong? Oh, we got mad. Oh, it's because I did -D. Oh, it's Cobalt stealing it. Never mind. Forget that part. Forget it. Anyways, whether you do it with the WinGit CLI or whatever, WinGit's probably the easiest way to install Git. But there isn't like a VS Code thing that I know of that can fetch Git and install it for you, just because there's so many permutations and issues with that kind of a thing. So yeah, I mean, I would usually just WinGit's probably the easiest way, or whatever tool you use to manage their desktop. You would just push it down like any other application, I would say. It does have, like, when you use the C# extension and such like that, that part does pull down the right .NET framework runtime for you to use, so you don't have to do that part anymore, at least to be able to run the extension. But yeah, I'm not aware of anything that does an automatic Git install. But yeah, but of course, Git is optional with VS Code, but of course, highly recommend it. It's very useful. Yeah, question?
A setup in which you remote to a different host and don't have it on your machine, but on that machine, make that you have to port all the extensions to, because you don't have internet access.
So the question is that when you're remoting to another machine, how do you pass all those settings over to that machine as well? Is that correct? So like, for instance, if it's a host that doesn't have internet access, passing the extension. So like, what if you're remoting to a host that doesn't have internet access, but you want to be able to install and run the extensions there? So that is possible. I wasn't going to spend too much time on VS Code remoting, but it is amazing. Like, again, that's a whole nother 2-hour session. But like, the things I want you to the things to check out is check out VS Code SSH remoting, check out VS Code tunnel server, check out VS Code CLI, where you can put it on any computer, Windows or Linux, doesn't matter. Type code tunnel, log in with Microsoft, and as long as that thing has one port out on 443 to the Microsoft Rendezvous service, you can get into that thing and remote it as if it was local. It's amazing. And I highly recommend you check it out. The VS Code CLI and code tunnels and dev tunnels are incredible. That being said, the way that all that infrastructure works is using this whole remoting protocol that is black voodoo magic. There's a checkbox option to tell it to send the extensions inline rather than have it download from the internet. So there is a way to do that. And typically it will do the settings sync and utilize the settings sync to go out and do that on that remote system too, so you get the same experience on both. But there are some, if you go into the remoting settings, there are some settings for those kinds of scenarios where you can say push it from the box. So however you're getting into that, whether it's SSH or the tunnel or whatever, it will just push it all inline through that. With the disclaimer, it's probably going to be really slow depending on your latency, etc. So I don't recommend that. Ideally, it's best that you just have internet access, but obviously there's lots of scenarios where you can't. And so if that's the case, that would be the way to get those things on there. Usually when you do like the remoting and you do like the SSH install and you click install, most of the time those go over the wire by default, I think. All that stuff is closed source, so it's hard to tell when they change things. But yeah, but otherwise I do know that there are if I go to, sorry, I guess I could just show you since I have it here. Under the remoting options, I don't know if I have the remoting extension here, but with like remote SSH, there's a few options here for like bind host and where is it? It's not the dynamic forwarding. It is, did they hide it? Maybe some of this, there we go. Okay, so local server download. So this is the thing where it's auto. By default, what it does is by default, it will try to go out to the internet. And if it fails, it will transfer from the host. But if you need to force this, you have this option here so that it can just force it to go inline. So. Question? Yeah, absolutely. Let's do. Am I in my right one here? I don't know why it signed me out of my sync settings. So let's see if we can get this back in real quick. No, I don't. Oh, I don't want to do that one. Ah. Oh, session's expired. Okay, whew, that was close. No, I want to do this one. Are you going to get it? Are you going to switch everything? Is it going to be fine? Probably not. Well, let's go ahead and open just a random thing. So if we're doing something like, let's go to projects here. Let's go with Excel Fast. Maybe this one's not as broken. Yeah, I don't care. That was a demo. So here I'm in. So this is like, for instance, this is not a PowerShell. This is a binary module per se, and so these are. But like the concepts are more or less the same. So if I have here under tests, and I have like a few Pester tests here. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. If you've already been writing Pester tests, the completion API is really good. It was recently revamped this year that it has a new model on the back end that's much faster, much more trained. So I don't know if my Copilot's enabled right now. My completion API is working. Like a lot of the time, if you've been writing tests, I don't think it's going to do it for me because I don't think yeah, that's right. Completion's model. Might not like me. So a lot of times when I'm doing, I'm just in here, and as I go through here, there it goes. So like, because I've already been writing Pester tests, it already has an idea of the kind of test that I've been writing, and I can just hit tab. Should error for that sounds like a good test to me. You can review it. Should error for an empty pass? Yeah, that's good. It'll just generate them. Like once you give it a few examples, it can just generate them in line that way. If you don't have any tests, then like for instance, here's one thing I can do is like I don't have any tests for export command, so I can go here. And so you can either do it inline here, but I like to use the Control-Alt-I, which is this edit with Copilot. And we have agent mode, and I can add, I have the context for that. You can add all these different contexts. And so when we start talking about things like MCP servers and all that crazy stuff, you can add in all this extra stuff to help give it more context. One really nice thing you can do is you can add custom instructions files. So if you do it either in your settings or if you just do it here, you can basically like predefine some prompts. So like my user profile in it, my VSCode profile has a prompt for PowerShell that has things like prefer splatting over, long lines and prefer to use built-in PowerShell functions over module functions, those kind of things. Like just little things to help kind of steer it in the right direction so I don't have to type those every time. It just automatically appends it to the end. And so that's really helpful. Like, like when writing, use your preferred brace format, use two spaces, like any of that kind of stuff that you care about, tuning and tweaking that you end up having to ask it all the time, you can just sort of preload that. But as far as generating Pester tests, so I have like this export command. And so I can just, as a start, we'll try it with, let's go back to GPT because it's faster. So it has the context of my command. I can go ahead and give it the context of other things that matter for this function. In this case, I only really care about this code base. I don't think any of the other functions are really going to help it, but I can just tell it, generate Pester tests for export command. And this is just kind of an easy way to at least start. And it's going to do the work, and we'll see if we get lucky or not. And so see how it already knew that I had an import command test, and it's like, okay, I'll try to follow that same structure. As you can see there, the new 4.1 model is pretty fast. Now I have export tests, and there's describe export Excel fast, exports to new module file. All those tests are now there. So, and if I were to compile it and run it, these tests look like they're pretty reasonable. It probably, as you see, it stole a lot of the style from my other test. And so I know that happened really fast, but as you saw, I just told it on the right, generate the tests, and then it created the file, and it created the tests. So GPT-4.1 is really fast. You're probably used to watching it sort of like scroll in. You saw how fast it just threw that up there. It's because the new model is really, really quick. So does that answer your question? Like that's a basic way to do it. And then you can tune and tweak and refine, and you can choose to keep and undo, and you go here and it'll show you what's changed. And you can say, nah, I don't like that, or keep it. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because there's a billion videos on it. That Microsoft VSCode channel, as I said, they're usually not specific to PowerShell. They're usually demoing it for like TypeScript or JavaScript frameworks, that kind of thing. But the exact same process applies. If you watch them, how they demo for how to generate like jest tests or whatever, it's the exact same process you would use for Pester tests. So then there's also the idea of like test-driven development. You could write the Pester tests as like the contract of what you want the code to do, and then tell it to write the code based on these Pester tests so it passes, and it will go through and it will write the code and then keep running Pester until those tests pass, and then just keep iterating until it passes all those tests. My only problem with that process is a lot of the times it might do some stuff you don't want it to do just to pass the test. So I tend to prefer, my personal preference is to write the code and then have it generate the tests, than vice versa. Because while I like the idea of test-driven development in the way that you like defining a contract, for me, the implementation sometimes steers what the UI looks like. Is like, I don't want to define a contract and then realize what I want to do is impossible, and then I got to rewrite all that stuff. So for me, Pester tests are most useful for whatever public side I'm facing to a user. Like if I'm giving you commands like import, export, I want to test that the process that you're going to open up PowerShell and type, that I've tested that that's going to work. And whatever I do on the back end, that can all change. I usually don't test any of that stuff back there. It's just whatever you're going to type and do, that's what I'm going to test. And if I change the stuff back here and that test still passed, great. I don't need a test for any of this stuff because that's all implementation detail. My contract to you is the commandlets I'm giving you. And so that's my personal testing philosophy. Everybody has, various ones, but that's at least the tests that I write first are those tests. Yeah, question. Yeah. So you can do these guys. You can do, like I said, you can do Control-I. You can do You can do this. You can do /tests, and you can do that. That'll work. My problem with this one is that the context is smaller with the inline chat. So even if you do this, my experience is that it doesn't put it in the right place. It doesn't have enough context. If you use agent mode and edits, it grabs way more context and tends to do a much better job the first time. Like the inline chat is great, and I still feel like the completion stuff, I generally use it instead of the inline chat. Or if I'm doing the inline chat, I'm usually just doing ask just to chat with the extension. I find it okay, but it doesn't grab as much context, and this stuff changes so much. So 3 months ago, which is an eternity in AI time, then that wasn't so bad. But now, because the edits and stuff, the token windows were so small that edits couldn't grab stuff. Well, in the span of 3 months, we have these models that can accept 300,000 tokens. So the model can just accept your entire code base, and before you tell it, give these instructions and give you a result in a pretty quick amount of time, as you saw me there with generating the Pester test. So I'm not going to present too much on this stuff because this presentation is going to be obsolete by the time the video comes out in 2 weeks if I go too much into the AI stuff. But it is really powerful, and it is really utilitarian for both PowerShell development, binary or script or otherwise. And I use it all the time. I would say 80% of the time I'm in Copilot doing stuff before I actually touch the code these days. I've found it very, very useful and very productive for my uses. Any other questions? Okay, I think we need to break at 45, right? So that's perfect. All right, well, thank you very much.